You are listening to the Locked On NHL podcast, where every Wednesday we have our Eastern Conference Roundup. I'm Ross Levitan with Mike DiStefano, and coming up on today's show, we are going to preview the Stanley Cup Final from the Florida Panthers' perspective. The Toronto Maple Leafs have hired a GM with a ton of experience, plus the coaching carousel continues and more. This is the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for making Locked On NHL your first listen on this Wednesday, May 31st. As I mentioned, I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me at Locked On Senators 5 days a week. With me, as always, it's the Battle of Ontario edition of Locked On NHL, because from Locked On Leafs, it's Mike DiStefano. It's a GM-heavy show. Your team just hired a new general manager in Brad Treliving, and Pierre Dorion was on Locked On Senators today, so you can go check that out for news and notes on Alex DeBrincat and a whole lot more. But Mike, we know Toronto, the center of the universe. Let's get to it right away, and then we will focus on the Stanley Cup Finals the next segment. But Brad Treliving, your initial reaction when the former Calgary Flames GM was hired in that same role for Toronto?
Yeah, I think it's probably the best of what they had available to them, to be quite honest with you. Like, I still am of the belief that Kyle Dubas, like, if given the option, I probably would have stuck it out with Dubas long term. But once they decided to move on from him, Brad Treliving just seemed like the guy who checked all the boxes of what they were looking for. Someone who has experience, someone who's made, numerous big, bold moves, who's got, quote unquote, bite, as they referenced one of the qualities they were looking for in a general manager. I think the resume speaks for itself. I know that the Flames didn't necessarily have, any more playoff success than Toronto did. But at the same time, I still look at what, Brad Treliving was able to build there in Calgary. And I like, on paper what he was able to do. Hopefully he can try and do some similar things here in Toronto and set them up for success. But it's going to be a big task. Obviously, there's high pressure coming into this job in Toronto.
Well, it's what we've seen over and over again. That's kind of what might relive. Sorry if that didn't make any sense. I'm trying to figure out what's the name of that toy that goes back and forth at a sandbox.
A sandbox. Oh, I thought you were saying yo-yo.
Thank you. Oh, I just had to talk myself into it. The teeter-totter of takes based on the big move he made last summer, where he trades Matthew Tkachuk, but everyone's like, whoa, he got a 115-point forward and a top four, maybe even top pair defenseman in Mackenzie Weegar. Wow. And then, as we've seen, Matthew Tkachuk.
And a first-round pick, Ross. Don't forget about the first-round pick, along with a prospect who was a second-round pick the year prior.
Right. But then you're looking at the Conn Smythe runner-up right now, I'd say, after Sergei Bobrovsky. So it's kind of gone both ways. Do you think he's coming in and going to try to make a similar trade with one of the core four and go more quantity for quality, while obviously looking to acquire good players too?
Yeah, I hope that is the case. I don't know. Honestly, I'm getting to a point here where you're hearing a lot of different things from many different sides in terms of the media contingent. There was a report last week that Brendan Shanahan, before letting go of Kyle Dubas, led the core four players. That's Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Tavares. Maybe Riley might have been part of that conversation as well. Led them to believe that it was his intention to run it back. I don't know how sold I am on that, exact report coming to fruition, though. I do believe that if you're looking for someone with experience, you're doing it for a reason. And if you're bringing in a guy like Brad Treliving, it's because he's been through these situations before where he's had to make seismic trades. We always talk about the Matt Tkachuk trade because that's the one that's most recent. But remember the blockbuster Dougie Hamilton, Elias Lindholm trade that he made a few years back? Like, it's not just once, but twice he's made absolute franchise-altering trades, and it's something that the Toronto Maple Leafs may need him to do again here for their squad. So bringing in someone who has that experience, I think, was clearly an asset that they wanted. You'd have to think it's because that's an avenue that they might have to explore this offseason.
And he's found himself with his back against the wall in ways I don't know will happen in Toronto, right? That reference trade you just made, that's because Adam Fox had no interest in signing with the Calgary Flames. Matthew Tkachuk made it clear after Johnny Gaudreau waited till the 11th hour to make his decision. They had
it's lemonade. Man makes lemonade. He's a lemonade salesman. I'm gonna use that moving forward. The man is a lemonade salesman. He turns the lemons. Oh, exactly. Totally runs in the family, right? I mean, his pop's one of the best salesmen of all time, I would say, definitely in this country. So I think he got, the apple doesn't fall or the lemon doesn't fall too far from the tree. Hopefully, again, like there's this weird, because you were about to bring up the Johnny Gaudreau situation and how, they let him walk. And because of that, Tkachuk wanted out and it became a tricky situation in Florida or in Calgary. But it went from, oh my God, we just lost Gaudreau for nothing, and now Tkachuk wants out. And all of a sudden, not too long after, it's like, all right, we now turn that into Huberdeau, Weegar, Nazem Kadri came in. Maybe this ain't a bad situation. We're still a team that can, at the time, at the beginning of the season, contend for not only a playoff spot, but a division title and potentially a Stanley Cup. They're one of my contenders out west. Obviously, it didn't turn out to be. There were some issues with the coach, and the goaltending didn't hold up, and Huberdeau obviously didn't live up to his end of the bargain either, and things went awry, and he moved on. And the hope is that doesn't get to that point in Toronto. He learns from the mistakes, and maybe he doesn't let Matthews and Nylander walk in the way they did with Gaudreau, which would be, again, franchise-altering moves if that were the case. Hopefully he can get this guy locked up long-term and kind of set the foundation for what the future of the Maple Leafs is going to be like going forward.
Are Leaf fans still happy with the all-in take that Kyle Dubas went? Because if he's renting out his house to Brad Treliving, man, he didn't leave a whole lot of food in the cupboards when it comes to draft picks.
No, there's nothing there, really. I mean, they recouped one of the first round picks by moving out Rasmus Sandin, which I applauded at the time was a shrewd move. I don't think Sandin was going to get much ice time, and they parlayed into a first round pick.
And not only that, but you would expect that to have been last four, right? Everyone had Boston going because it was Boston's pick that they sent to Washington in the Orlov trade. And then now it's in the early 20s or mid-20s.
28th. The 28th pick locked in.
Only the last four that pushed back. That makes sense. Yeah. Still, hey, couple picks better than it could have been if they made the final. But go on.
But yeah, like I'm just, I think that ultimately I think Brad Treliving, there's not a whole lot there for him to work with in terms of if he wants to move out capital. But again, I don't know if you're looking to move out capital in terms of picks and prospects. Like if you're making a trade, it's a good chance that it's going to be one of those, big players, and that'll be the way to fill out your roster. Kind of, similarly to the way that the Jack Eichel trade worked out for Buffalo, where they bring in an Alex Tuch, a Peyton Krebs, some picks, prospects, and then eventually, those guys will all build into hopefully, what Eichel, I don't know if they'll ever become Jack Eichel, obviously, but they could somehow replicate Eichel's success or Eichel's production with those players combined. Could that happen with a Nylander or a Marner, or hopefully not, but a Matthews if they decide to go into that direction?
Well, the Buffalo Sabres are the gift that keeps on giving. You mentioned Jack Eichel. Well, there's a pair of Sabres that were traded to Florida and are having a huge impact on the Panthers run. For more on the Leafs, go check out Locked On Maple Leafs 5 days a week, wherever you download your podcast, and available on YouTube for the Stanley Cup Final. Locked On Florida Panthers, Locked On Vegas Golden Knights will have you covered each and every step of the way. I'd imagine they have a crossover episode coming soon, and I love those crossovers because the passion is always there at the Locked On NHL channel, and it's local experts on the biggest stories. Make every day start with Locked On NHL. But coming up on the other side, we will have that discussion about the Florida Panthers. What are they going to bring to the Stanley Cup Final? Not only for fans who've been watching throughout their playoff run from the Boston to the Toronto to the Carolina series, but if you're just tuning in to the Stanley Cup Final for the spectacle, what can you expect from these Cats along the way? Also, man, We're getting a lot of news and notes. Could we even get more by the time the show's over? We know out west, Ron Francis has just been extended as Seattle Kraken GM through the 2027 season. We've got some coaching news out in Nashville, which Locked On Predators is all over, and a whole lot more. So it's a busy time of year. And of course, I say this as like the guy, verbal meme here, Mikey, guy sitting in a lawn chair. I'm still waiting for the Senators sale to happen. You know, the guy who's in he's a skeleton because he's been waiting for so long. That's me with the Sens sale. Still no answer there. We're going to have lots to cover here on news and notes and a Stanley Cup final preview. You're listening to Locked On NHL. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The FanDuel Sportsbook is the best spot, especially for new customers, because they get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drain. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a bigger chance at bigger payouts with the same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel. It's the official sports betting partner of the NBA and the Locked On NHL channel. All right, you're listening to Locked On NHL on this final day of May. Stanley Cup Finals, still a couple days away. And if you're a Florida Panthers fan, you have to be getting restless after they finished off the Carolina Hurricanes in, Mike, would you call it the closest sweep of all time?
Well, if you ask Rod Brindamore, he would say it wasn't a sweep. They lost 4 games, but it wasn't a sweep. It could have went the other way. And look, as goofy as that comment is, it certainly would still classify as a sweep. The sentiment is true. It could have gone the sweep the other way because, yeah, I'd agree with you. It was definitely the closest 4-game series win that I think I've seen. 3 of them ended up, well, I guess 2 ended up in overtime. 1 went 4 overtimes, and the other one was 4 seconds away from a 3rd overtime. And unfortunately, by not getting there, Carolina ends up packing their bags.
Well, and now it's been a week since that game 4. So there's a former Sens coach, and I've got clips here already loaded onto the Roadcaster that we laugh about at Locked On Senators, but it might ring true. This is what Guy Boucher used to always say about long layovers.
Rest is a weapon. Rest is a weapon.
Rest is a weapon. Now, he said that so much and then lost so much, it got Pierre Dorion to say this at his postseason press conference.
Rest is a weapon. If I hear that one more time, I'll go crazy.
All-time quote there. But where do you stand on the rest versus rust debate?
Did you play that for him today when he joined you on Locked On Sens?
No. If I did, I would have been.
I don't even know what he's thinking. He's just a complete brickhead. He's got nothing up there. Bad guy, bad player, but what a joke he is.
I'm trying to keep it professional here, Mikey.
Good stuff. You know what? I think like 10 days too much, man. And for a team that really was just running on what seemed like pure momentum and adrenaline, like that can easily stop and put it to an abrupt halt after 10 days. 4 or 5, maybe even 6 days you could get around, but 10, like that seems just so such an extended layoff here. I am curious to see how game 1 goes for Florida, and more specifically, like Sergei Bobrovsky after 10 days without game action. Is that going to kind of allow this Cinderella run that he's on to take a little bit of a turn for the worse? That's the player who I'm kind of looking at and thinking to myself, if there's one dude who maybe is impacted more than anyone else, it could be Bob's at this point.
Yep, I was looking the same direction because we even saw Carolina wanted to get their goalie rest after the 4 overtime game. They started Antti Raanta the next one, whereas there's no chance. Hey, thank you for your service, Alex Lyon. You got us to the playoffs if you're the Panthers, but this is Sergei Bobrovsky's team no matter what. This is his Conn Smythe to lose, I would argue, if obviously the Panthers win. Otherwise, you're looking at probably Jack Eichel, if not, maybe Mark Stone if he has a couple more big moments in these playoffs. But, man, this is the most, I would say, evenly matched series Is that fair to say? For maybe I'm over exaggerating a bit, but if you're Florida, you've kind of been way underdog in every series so far. Whereas I think with Vegas, like there were people who were, I guess, sleeping on Vegas for lack of a better term, but they've shown they won the West for a reason. Yeah, me too. I had the Jets beating them in round one. I almost sent out tweets chirping people after the Jets won game one. I was like, oh, I win in the playoffs. He's dashed 3 in game one. Well, yeah, what's he done since? Sick take by me.
Yeah, now he's probably the front runner. I mean, Marshall might have a nice claim as well as the Vegas Conn Smythe Award winner. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a good series. I think it is very, very close. It's going to be interesting to see how they deal with the speed, like the speed of what the Florida Panthers have been able to generate the last little bit, but. Dude, they've got just hulking defensemen on that Vegas blue line. Like when I'm kind of doing the whiteboard theory here, I'm looking at, okay, who has the edge where? I think Vegas probably has the edge up front, I would say, especially deeper into the lineup. Like their fourth line, man, that is an incredible fourth line. I had Sean Gentili on Leafs Lunch yesterday, and he threw out a stat that I thought really illustrated how much depth that this team has. The fourth line alone has outscored their opponents 21-9 throughout the season when they're out there on the ice. 21-9. That's not what you see a lot from the fourth line. So that just illustrates how deep this team is. And so I would say the forward groupings, I would give the nudge to the Vegas Golden Knights. I would say defensively for sure. I like the depth of that blue line. They just got a bunch of big dudes who can skate. 2 Norris caliber defensemen in Pietrangelo and Shea Theodore. The goalie is where it does get interesting, right? But we've seen what a hot goalie can do. He can be the ultimate equalizer, and that kind of is where you give the edge to Sergei Bobrovsky. So for that perspective, yeah, I think it's going to be a very close series if Bobrovsky can remain as red hot as he was, through the playoffs that he's played so far since coming in, since Game 5 against Boston when he made that season-saving stop on Brad Marchand. And since then, he's been unbelievable. And I think they're going to clearly need that again if the Florida Panthers want to stand a chance at winning a Stanley Cup here.
Whose decor would you rather have? Contracts aside, just for this playoff stretch, the Carolina Hurricanes or the Vegas Golden Knights?
Man, I'd rather the Golden Knights.
They're probably top 2 though, right?
I would say so. Dallas is up there too. And that's when I remember thinking about this during the playoffs, and I'm like, man, defense wins championships. Like that is very much a phrase that I believe in. And when you look around the league and you look at, okay, well, who are the best teams in each conference? 3 of them are probably the 3 best defensive teams in the NHL, in Carolina, Dallas, and the Vegas Golden Knights. The Florida Panthers may be a bit of an outlier there, but what's the best, the best defense? What's the last line of defense? It's the goaltender, and he's been quite unreal himself. So I've been a big believer in defense wins championships, which might be a big reason why I kind of lean very slightly to the Vegas Golden Knights in this one.
I'm taking the Panthers in 6. I don't know if we're ready to get to our predictions. Yeah, I'm taking the Panthers in 6. I just think they have that it factor going for them right now. Hey, prayers up for Brooks Koepka and any Panthers/Heat fan who is going to go every single day from Friday when the NBA final starts. There's a game every other night where they're going to be locked into their team. Like that's the dream as a sports fan, man.
Well, there's a lot of space in between though. Like, did you see the NHL schedule?
Every travel day they get 2.
It could be 3 weeks, a 3-week cup final. It's absurd.
That's a bit much. Let the boys play. I'm not asking for back-to-backs, but I think every other day is perfectly reasonable. Especially, I feel like that even the players are like, "Hey, like let's roll here."
Yeah, let's get this rolling a little bit. It seems a little unnecessary, but
you understand the news cycle too, right?
Yeah, you would think. I mean, I understand not wanting to play on the same nights that the NBA finals are. You're not going to win that battle, but I mean, just go the opposite nights. Find out the schedule, the way that it's working out. To have 2 nights off does seem a little sketchy, but hey.
So The Panthers, you watch them very closely for that series against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like, what can fans who maybe are just tuning in for a Stanley Cup final, what can they expect to see from this group?
Look, they're a feisty group. I mean, obviously they're led by Matt Tkachuk, who might be one of the more feistier players, him and his brother in the NHL. Sam Bennett's, a bit of a prick himself, and they've got a really deep roster, honestly. They've that third line, Lundell, Reinhart, and Luosterainen were menaces in the second and third round. And they got some decent blue liners too, like Brandon Montour. If you're not paying attention to the season that he had, dude had 73 points this year in the regular season. I think he's got like 6 or 7 goals here throughout the playoffs as well as a blue liner. Gus Forsling is turning into a defensive stud. He's really blossoming and having his breakout campaign here in the postseason. They're getting some good minutes out of guys like Mark Stahl, Aaron Ekblad. Obviously, haven't even mentioned him, but this guy's a top pair defenseman as well. One of the best blue liners that they have. So, they got a really, really deep team, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to Bobrovsky, man. Like, can that guy be the same player he's been throughout these playoffs, or will the bubble burst? Because if the bubble bursts on Bob, buds, they're in trouble.
Sweet.
They're in trouble.
But I still taking Florida, man. Bob's just got me all fired up. What's your pick in this series?
I like Vegas. I do like Vegas, but I think it'll go 7 games. I think we'll see a full 3-week, 7-gamer, and Vegas will take it on home ice. And Jack Eichel will be the Conn Smythe winner.
Okay. I actually don't hate that call. He's been so lights out. And like, what more can you say about Bruce Cassidy? You got to think he's been giving him some Patrice Bergeron tips, right? From his time in Boston of like where he can position himself in the defensive zone. Because we know that he's an offensively gifted player. He's so good with the puck on his stick, but it's the defensive aware. And even just playing, I know they're not on the same line right now. They were at the start of the playoffs, but playing with Mark Stone, like that guy's gotten so many guys paid. Like he got Zach Smith, a fourth liner, a $4 million contract per year.
Yep.
Like he's gotten a ton of guys paid, and no surprise, Chandler Stevenson's playing the best hockey of his career since being on a line with Mark Stone as well.
Now Chandler Stevenson's been a diamond in the rough for the last 3 years here, pal.
How long has he been playing with Mark Stone? 3 years?
Well, I mean, but Mark Stone's barely played the last 2 years. So what are you talking about?
And he does.
He keeps up the same level of production. I know he's your boy, but Chandler Stevenson, put some respect on that guy's name.
Yeah.
By the way, Jack Eichel plus 400 on FanDuel to win the Conn Smythe. Mark Stone plus 2,000.
What about Bob?
Bobrovsky is leading the way at plus 200, so 2-1.
I don't like
odds on Bob.
I don't like the odds. The odds are too close for that. I like to sprinkle a little bit. How about Matty Tkachuk?
Matty Tkachuk plus 360. Second shortest odds.
Second, so it's 2 Panthers.
So, yeah, you've got Bob's, Tkachuk, Eichel, Jonathan Marchessault coming in as the 4th best option here.
But I do find it interesting because Vegas is the favorite in the series. Aren't they minus 130 last I checked?
They are, but I think there's the assumption, and let me know if you believe this. If they lose a close, tight 7-game series, low scoring, and they lose it, could Bobrovsky still win the Conn Smythe? Like, could he pull the J.S. Jaguar, where it's like this dude was on another level to the point where even with a Stanley Cup Finals loss, he was still the MVP of the tournament?
I think you could make the argument, but it's certainly not like a J.S. Jaguar. I don't think he's been like.
Dude, are you kidding me?
You think he's been?
Yes, 100%.
Oh, buddy,
dude. The 8 games leading up to Game 7 and Game 7 or Game 4, he was really good. He had a .958 save percentage, averaging .958 save percentage.
Yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. Jaguar was .945 in that 2003 playoff run.
Yeah.
Wow. Either way, man, we're into a great series, and that's what I love about.
Really quickly, do you know how many goals saved above expected Bobrovsky has to this point?
Easily 10.
19.
That's impressive, I will say.
Where would the Panthers be? Where, keep in mind, the games against Toronto and the games against Florida, I believe all but one of those games were 1-goal games.
You said against Florida. Were you talking Carolina or Boston?
Sorry, Carolina, yeah. Against Carolina and Toronto, right? So they played 9 games. 8 of the 9 were 1-goal games.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
He stopped 19.
He's making a case, man.
Dude,
Plus
it's
200.
crazy.
Plus 200 to win the Conn Smythe.
Yeah, it's not the
I'd
best.
either go Matthew Tkachuk or I'd go with Jackie Aces as my pick right now to win the
Well,
Conn.
I realized that I actually laid a futures wager back in November on Vegas to win the Stanley Cup. I got them at 14-1. So my FanDuel account is definitely a Vegas fan. So,
Hell yeah. My FanDuel account is a Denver Nuggets fan. I had no idea as well. I just kind of was playing the board right before the playoffs started, and I hit them 4 units on the Western Conference champs, hit that, and 2 units on a NBA championship. So that's all with our friends over at FanDuel. Coming up on the other side, though, we are going to get into some news and notes from around the National Hockey League. That's next. You're listening to Locked On NHL. All right, Locked On NHL, May 31st. We still have a few more sleeps before the NHL finals begin. It will start on the Strip in Vegas on Saturday, June 3rd at 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern, and then we'll shift after 2 games to South Florida as well. And as we already talked about, it's Saturday, Monday, Thursday, Saturday, Tuesday for Game 5. So it is quite the spread out Stanley Cup final, but it will all culminate in I hope a great game, or I hope a great series. But either way, it's going to lead into a fascinating offseason. Like, what's caught your attention outside of obviously you're dialed in with the Toronto Maple Leafs? Like, what around the league is catching your attention right now?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they've hired Treliving. I guess now it's like, okay, what's next? The Dubas situation is interesting to me as well, because I'm curious what he could do with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Like, that's a situation where you're going into a spot where Crosby's there, but at the same time, it's like, okay, are you going to go and roll at the same core? Is there going to be pressure to compete? Is he going to have an opportunity and have the autonomy that he wanted here in Toronto? Is he going to have it there to do what he believes is necessary to put them forward for long-term success? That is a definitely a interesting position that I think that Dubas will be in. We'll see if he ends up with that job. He still hasn't taken it yet. There's been, rumblings that it's the ball's in his court, and essentially they're just waiting to hear back on what he wants to do. We did hear 2 weeks ago that, he came out and said, I'm not sure if I want to. He's talking about how difficult it was being a GM of Toronto, how difficult it was on his family. Maybe there was some truth to it. Maybe he's not ready to move on into another organization. We'll see. But that is, the Dubas situation is one that certainly has my eye as well.
It certainly has the attention of Sens fans as well. I have a theory, and sometimes I like to put my tinfoil hat on, spark up a couple electrolytes, and get myself into a deep rabbit hole on the internet. And we know Kyle Dubas' family. He's from Ontario. He's grew up a Sens fan. We also know that. He's been vocal about that in the past. Hell, and then he got to sit next to Jason Spezza, who resigned right after he left the organization. And my theory is that one of the Toronto-based bidders for the Ottawa Senators in their sale process has 4 bidders left. 3 of them are Toronto-based. One of them is the owner of the Hamilton Bulldogs right now. Another one used to be minority owners of the Pittsburgh Penguins. The third is one of the richest men in Canada. His bid is basically just him, Steve Apostolopoulos. He put a $6 billion bid in for the Washington Football Club just a couple months ago. But
so he's got money.
My theory, he's also Toronto-based, real estate guy. Now, my theory is that one of them have told Kyle Dubas that he's got not the GM job. I believe that someone wants to hire him as president of hockey operations of the Ottawa Senators, and that he said in his press conference, or maybe it came out after, maybe this was a Shanahan thing, he wanted full autonomy of decision making. And I think that the theory here that I'm connecting the dots, Pittsburgh wants an answer from Dubas, or else they have to move somewhere else. Dubas wants an answer from this group, And then that group is getting pissed off at the process. And that's why so much stuff is coming up like 32 Thoughts, where Elliot Friedman is saying this process is a complete gong show. I think that's coming directly from a group that is waiting on Kyle Dubas. They don't want to lose Dubas to Pittsburgh, especially if it's the Kimmels, because that would be an added little revenge twist because they used to be owners of the Penguins until last year. So that's my tinfoil hat theory, and I'm sticking to it.
The only like hole that I would poke there is like, I don't know if he would want the full responsibilities of being like the president of a hockey club. I think in his mind, he would love to be general manager, but also like have final say in all hockey operations, but have a president be able to do all the, kissing babies and talking with the public and schmoozing, the alumni and all that. Like that's what I envision him wanting to do. And that seems like what he's being offered in Pittsburgh. It's like, yeah, you're going to be the GM, but you will have final say in hockey operations. I think that's kind of a cake and eat your two scenario for Kyle Dubas, where he doesn't have to be the full-on president and have all of those, roles and responsibilities. I think he just wants to focus on team building and organization building for on-ice success. That would be the only thing I would say to poke a hole into that theory. But hey, who knows? Maybe that is part of the process.
If he's signing a 5-year contract though in Pittsburgh, that's setting the difficulty slider all the way to hard with the way their prospect pool has been deteriorating, and rightfully so. Like when you have Sidney Crosby and an aging core that's so good, you want to go all in and you're trading your picks, but there's not a whole lot in that cupboard already.
Question for you, Ross. Question for you. Would it be ludicrous for Pittsburgh to give him like a 7 or 8 year deal?
Yes.
See, I was having this conversation with someone yesterday. If you're just doing a 5-year like situation with Dubas, right? You assume, okay, Crosby's on a contract for 3 more years, I think. You've got Letang and Malkin kicking around for a couple more as well.
2 for Sid.
2 for Sid, and then Malkin and Letang have a couple more, I think.
Malkin
as well.
has 3, and Letang has 5.
Yeah, so you're assuming that
5 years for Letang. I'm sorry, 5 years for Letang at 36 years old?
Absurd. Absolutely absurd. But you got to assume that at least the next 2-3 years, they're going to be all in, go for it mode, as long as like Sid and Gino are the heads of the snake here.
They're right? They missed the playoffs this year.
But I get that. But to do that, like, what will they have to do to the future of this club? So if you go push the chips, keep pushing the chips all in, you just continue to go after it. You're not leaving yourself with a whole lot when those guys inevitably walk into 3-4 years into retirement. He's going to need a couple of years to reboot and retool. So why only give him 5? He's going to need that couple of years on the back end of the Sid and Gino era anyways, before you can even make a proper evaluation. I suppose you could do 5 and then it's like, okay, if you like where you're going, you can extend again, but why bother even go into that? If I'm Kyle Dubas, I'm like, give me 8 years and give me a full proper chance to evaluate things. Once that's done, in a few years to turn it around, then hopefully by year 8, we're back into contention. And then you can extend me again.
I mean, players sign 8-year contracts all the time. How many of them end perfect? Who knows? But also it makes sense in the position, especially that the Pittsburgh Penguins are in. If you're a GM though, and I want your opinion here as a Leafs guy, but also a league guy, what's the more attractive job, to go and get that high-end core that's already aging, or try to take a team like Ottawa to the next level?
It's a good question. There's something about maybe being able to work with Sid. You know what I mean? Like there's always going to be something sexy to that. Like even Brian Burke, when he left Sportsnet, he was like, if I ever had the opportunity to work with Sid, I was going to jump on it. And he did. He left. Didn't turn out well, but he did. And it sounds like maybe it could be a similar situation with Dubas, where it's like, there's an option here where if I could get 3 years of Sidney Crosby just to work with that guy. And he met with Sidney Crosby. There's not many times where that happens. That's like LeBron James level, player GM type of stuff. I probably would try my hand with the Pittsburgh Penguins, to be honest with you. I think the Sens have a brighter future, don't get me wrong, but it's the aura of working with Sidney Crosby, and that would probably lead me to Pittsburgh over Ottawa.
Yeah, that's fair. I can see from a GM's perspective, a lot of Ottawa's core is already locked up. It kind of feels like you'd have less.
Not your team. Yeah,
Yeah.
not this isn't my team, right? Like it'd be similar to like when
Well, when Brian Murray built the Anaheim Ducks, drafted Perry, drafted Getzlaf, and then those guys beat him in the Stanley Cup final in 07.
Yeah. And then Burke went in and took the credit for, well, he did. He gave credit to Brian Murray, but he ended up with the name on the cup instead of Brian Murray.
Yeah.
Right? And
because his big move was getting Scott Niedermayer. Well, guess what? If Brian Murray didn't bring in Rob Niedermayer, he wouldn't have got Scott Niedermayer. It was as simple as that, getting his brother in the mix. Hey, the Washington Capitals hired a guy you're familiar with, Spencer Carberry. Am I saying that right? Yeah, former Maple Leafs assistant. What do you think Caps fans can expect with that hire?
Look, I think that's a pretty good hire. Like, he's a young, up-and-coming coach in the league. I think he's 41 years old, which is relatively young for coaching. He's familiar with that system. He was an assistant in Hershey, their AHL club, prior to coming to Toronto. So there was strong ties always with that Washington organization. So not surprised at all that he ended up there. His biggest task was to try and get this power play back under, back up and running when he came to Toronto a couple of years ago. And they had a lot of success. They were top 5 last year, the number 1 power play last year. They were top 3 again this year. They finally had the power play, find success in the playoffs this season. He's a smart guy, a really smart hockey guy. And I think that obviously when it comes to the power play, he's got maybe one of the best power play shooters in NHL history in Alex Ovechkin that will now be on his team. So I think that he'll be able to find some success. He had a lot of interviews last summer too, including in Boston, and didn't end up getting, the head coaching role. But he interviewed for like 4 different head coaching jobs this offseason. And finally, Washington said, all right, enough's enough. Let's go get our guy. So Spencer Carberry off to Washington. Good luck.
Hey, he's got some familiarity with Rasmus Sandin. You think he could be a breakout candidate next year? I know the first-round pick's still a nice compensation, but you think he could be the guy with John Carlson kind of aging up?
Potentially. I would imagine that, Sandin certainly will be given some opportunity just due to the familiarity. He'll know kind of his strengths and weaknesses, especially if he gets some power play time as PP2, as obviously John Carlson will still command a lot of the first unit power play minutes. But yeah, I could see Sandin maybe taking a step and allowing him to continue to blossom as a young defenseman. Like when he got traded, I still believe hey, this guy could become a top 4 defenseman. It's not that I thought he was going to be a bust by any stretch of the imagination, but Toronto wasn't going to use him, and his value was only going to decrease as the season went along. If he wasn't going to play, they were going to get a first-round pick for him this summer. It was going to turn it into Travis Durbett scenario, where maybe you're lucky if you get a 3rd the following season. So they trade him at a high where he was playing at a decent level and still has some prospect, shine to him as a young player in the league. And so I think he still can become a top 4 defenseman in the NHL, good puck mover. But certainly it probably enhances the odds of him, being a little bit better with some comfort behind the bench in Carberry for sure.
Any final thoughts? Anything we didn't hit on you want to get to?
What else did I write down here potentially? Oh, I don't know if you saw, but it sounds as though John Hines, who was recently let go by the Nashville Predators, was given permission to speak with the New York Rangers for their head coaching hire. So the Rangers still looking to get a head coach in their books. I think they also actually spoke with Carberry, if I'm not mistaken. And so that was more little news that I saw today. I don't know if you saw anything else in terms of the coaching carousel and updates on some interviews or not.
Well, I keep hearing, and we got to give credit to Rear Admiral from Spit and Chicklets. He thinks that Peter Laviolette's going to be the next coach of the New York Rangers. Now, I know they just got permission to speak with John Hines, though. So clearly the decision hasn't been finalized. Like, who do you think the Rangers should hire? Because they've had a lot of trouble developing their young prospects. Should that be something that they prioritize, or because of where they're at in their competitive window, it's kind of like, hey, if you're a kid and you're left behind, like, hey, the train's moving fast here. You're either caught on or we'll get someone else.
Yeah, it's a good question. I know there was a report like a few weeks ago, the Leafs were still in the playoffs at the time, potentially Sheldon Keefe being a person of interest if he were to be let go for Toronto. So maybe that is still in the cards and why they haven't finalized anything yet, waiting for Toronto to make their decision on Sheldon Keefe. But yeah, it's a good point. Like, they have really struggled, but I don't know if Gallant didn't do a whole lot of help when it came to Alexis Lafreniere and giving him opportunity. He just skated in the bottom six for a majority of the season, 14 minutes a night for a lot of the year. And I would assume that that's kind of something that rubbed New York the wrong way, the fact that he hasn't developed into what they expected him to, and maybe bringing in someone who has a good development, with helping younger players along and giving them opportunity could be a good fit. I don't know if Hines is that guy. Like, Nashville has never been known as a team that, had a lot of young youth injected into their lineup and had success. A couple of guys, I suppose, but Peter Laviolette maybe, but he's been a guy who's kind of taken veteran teams to the next level more so than, starting off with a young group. So I don't know if either of those players fit the bill for trying to work with young guys, but who knows? We'll see what ends up happening. That's why I think maybe Sheldon Keefe could be in the conversation, right?
Well, and let's see what did happen, because as we've been having this conversation, I've been going back, checking our list, checking it twice for our draft from last week or from 2 weeks ago, where we had the Eastern Conference final. We picked a full starting lineup each. And because of goals, I dominated, but otherwise it's pretty close here.
You dominated. Oh, what was the final?
Well, I'm pulling it up right now. I'm just finishing up the last one here. So you had Aho, Verhaeghe, Barkov, Burns, Ekblad, and Freddie Anderson. I had Kachuk, Jarvis, Reinhart, Montour, Slavin, and Bobrovsky. I just need to pull up. Montour went 0 points that series, eh?
Yeah, he
actually might be pretty close. Like, I think that I beat you because Matthew
goaltending. Nah, goaltending is where you pulled away.
Well, 2 points for a goal, we said, and Matthew Tkachuk had 4 goals. You had 3 goals total on your team.
Oh, okay. So you probably beat me pretty handily then.
Yeah,
if
so
that's the case.
Well, I'm pulling it
you
up.
Also took all 4. I mean, you took all 4 of the wins, right? 2 points for a goalie win. That's 8 points right there. And then didn't we have a shutout, a bonus for shutouts too, which they did end up getting?
Oh, they got a shutout, right?
Yeah, so you blew me out of the water.
Yeah, I did. Here, I'll pull it up.
You absolutely blew me out of the water. Hey, man, it was a low-scoring series. Like, both goalies were spectacular. And I remember saying, too, I thought I said Bobrovsky was the wild card of the 2 goalies. He's most likely to get on a run and have a shutout. But I felt like Carolina was going to win it, so I went with, the 4 wins and the 4 points with Anderson. That backfired. 0 points, 0 wins out of Carolina and Freddie Anderson. And right from there, I knew. I'm pretty sure you beat me with the goaltending, period. Legitimately, your goalie, 5. Did we say 3 or 5 points for a shutout?
5 for a shutout.
Which is absurd. We never should have done 5, because 1 shutout, that basically would be curtains. But so you would be at 8 plus 5, 13 points with your goalie alone. I got 2, 4, 5, 8 plus 6, 14. I beat you by 1. Oh no, I got another one there. I beat you by 2 points if I was only playing your goalie.
So that's that then with the we should do that again for the Stanley Cup final, but we'll join in progress. We'll see how the first 2 games go, and we'll get back there for the end of the series, because I don't think this one's going to be a sweep. I think we'll be able to do that. So that'll be next week on Locked On NHL. But again, it's local experts on the biggest stories 5 days a week. So stay tuned tomorrow. Power rankings. We got Friday as well. Every day, your home. Local experts on the biggest stories. For more, check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Check out the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Locked On Vegas Golden Knights. I mentioned we had Pierre Dorion, Senators GM, on our show today, and I'm sure there'll be plenty to break down on Locked On Leafs with Brad Treliving, now the man in charge. For Mike DiStefano, I'm Ross Levitan. This has been the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every day.